Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Now today I'm going to show you a game that deals with one of my favourite campaigns of the war in the West, and there's a bit of a clue on the map behind me, but of course the Battle of the Bulge is certainly a household name among wargamers who are into their 20th century wargaming, who are into World War II. We've all heard of it. And there are certain milestones within that narrative that are stuck in our consciousness. And one in particular that always amused and remained with me is that moment when the Germans were surrounding the town of Bastogne, send the ultimatum in to the US forces, mainly the elements of the 101st Airborne, who were completely surrounded, saying, look, your situation's hopeless. Best thing you can do is give in, really. And in a response which quite rightly has entered the annals of US military legend, General Anthony McAuliffe sends back this beautiful one-word reply, and that reply is nuts. So that, of course, is a brilliant moment, and it's not surprising that I'm sure there are other simulations of that particular part of the Battle of the Bulge that carry that name, but I'm going to talk about one in particular. This is Nuts, the Battle of the Bulge card game, which was published by Decision Games way back in 1998. The design was by Mr. McKellenan, David McKellenan. It's the only one of his designs that I ever bought, but do you know what? If his other work was on a level with this, then I really ought to hunt down some of his other games, because this is one of those amazing little games that packs a huge amount of punch into a very small box. I mean, look, that's not very much at all, is it? Sadly, this game is no longer produced by Decision Games. I really feel they ought to rethink that one, because I think it did very well back in the day. Certainly myself and fellow gamers who played it, I bought it in around 2000, my copy, and I've still got it, I still play it. So what is it that makes this game so unique and interesting? Well, there are a couple of card games that relate to the Bulge campaign, but they're very generic in nature. I have a couple of titles in mind, but this is strategic. So there are two boxes, and the only difference between them is that one of them deals with the northern half of the battle, and the other deals with the southern. And a glance at the back will give you an idea of what the cards are like. You get units, you get locations, and you occasionally get, well, you more than occasionally, you get personalities. So there's a papers card. And what you get in each box, north and south, is nothing more than a rather thin sheet of rules, impressively thin given how deep this game is, and a stack of cards. So this is the contents of the south deck. The card backs, yes, are really quite garish. You have to be a bit careful with these because that swastika is very prominent. And for people who are a bit sensitive about these things, understandably so, it's not always easy to tell that it's got a star-spangled nuts stamped across it. So yeah, these really stand out. But it's very good card stocks, very solid. Again, I'm one of these people who never sleeves their cards, but you look at the surface of these cards. Would you believe that I have owned this game for over 20 years, and I make a point of playing it at least 4 times a year? It is that good. So it's a strategic card game, as I say. The different combat units are represented by their own cards. The layout is pretty simple and easy to understand. If I borrow the 4th Armoured from Combat Command R, You've got your lovely photograph. The cards are liberally illustrated with photographs from the Bulge campaign. You have the unit badge. That is their deployment, infantry combat rating, armor combat rating, um, artillery combat rating. That's the unit's health, or you could think of it as endurance. And that is illustrating the fact that it's a mechanized unit rather than a leg unit. That's the Herborna Forest. Some basic rules about how it affects attackers and defenders. And who could possibly go through a review of a game like this without holding up that card? There are different grades of general. There's famous general, there's very famous general, then there's people like him, truly famous general. Now you might be tempted to think that that's just a bit of hyperbole, but it's not. The status of truly famous is important in this game because the Germans have Skorzeny team cards that can in turn trigger jumpy US MPs arresting senior officers who they think might be Germans in American uniform. Patton, by virtue of being truly famous, is recognizable everywhere, and even the most jaded military policeman is not going to arrest him, just as well, really. You also have, I'm going to hold out some German cards, you get events which can favour you directly or hinder the enemy. So bug out confusion, allows you to closely pursue retreating US forces, propaganda leaflets that you can drop in the midst of an artillery bombardment. There's lots going on under a game that, if you got both boxes, just really comprised a big stack of cards covering the whole of the Bulge. So how does this work as a strategic card game? Well, there's no board. You need to have an imaginary grid across your gaming table, and there are 3 columns within that grid. And they run from A to C in the southern deck, and D to F in the northern deck. And within those columns, you have rows, imaginary rows running across them. I'll find the illustration in the rulebook because that will sum up much better than I can verbally. What I mean. Perfect. That's exactly what I was looking for. So there you go. If you have both sets, that is your setup on the table. And you have to be a bit careful because placing your cards, you have to make sure there's a clear boundary between cards which are, say, in D2 and in D3, because it's very important that you keep them separate unless you want any cross-boundary confusion. The objective is very simple. If you're playing only the north or the south set, the Germans have to exit 3 armoured units across the edge of the US edge of the board, representing their drive for the River Meuse. The US wins by preventing this. And within that broad overview, both sides, that broad mission, I should say, both sides have various means of pursuing it. The Germans have some units that are capable of great mobility, but they suffer from the traffic jams, which are very, very cleverly modelled in this game through the use of American special cards and German fuel limitation cards, also playable by the US player. Various things bog the Germans down. The weather can change. This is very significant. Foul weather favours the Germans. Clear weather favours the US, because of course the sooner you get clear weather, the sooner you can throw in airstrikes. So there's a lot of interconnected card play. The battles tend to swirl around terrain. These are from the north deck, so forests again, Bois de Tavay, the ever-present Our River, which can be both a help and a hindrance depending on who you are and whether you're advancing or defending. The US forces start scattered and weak, as they did in the historical opening of the campaign. The Germans start very concentrated with a massive initial punch. But the rules in this game do favour the defence, and the Germans have to be judicious in their attacks because assaults in this game, as they were during the battle itself, tend to be head on and bloody because of the very limited manoeuvring options. The Germans occasionally can bypass US units, and actually, in some areas like Bastogne and St. Vith, if the US allows their defence to contract within the urban area but don't leave units in the surrounding countryside, they will find themselves encircled. So all of these different factors that you would expect in a Battle of the Bulge game of much greater complexity are present in this incredibly simple setup. So much for the introduction. I suppose the next burning question is, how does this game play? Well, that will be one for my next video, where I will set up a scenario and take you all through a demonstration of how this game in fact plays. And hopefully through that demonstration I'll flesh out the nitty-gritty of why I like this game so much, and why I think it's a great pity that this gem of a game is no longer in print. But in the meantime, thank you very much for joining me again. Always appreciate your company on the channel, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.